This PowerPoint is another worked example of how you can get the most out of your answers to Paper 1 Section A, where you have to answer the 4 questions. This text is from a novel called The Mortal Immortal by Mary Shelley, and again it gives you context at the top. So the main character, the scientist, is Cornelius, and he's developing a magic potion. He tells his assistant not to touch it, and then he goes to sleep. If you're reading through, we'll summarize what happens in each paragraph. So Cornelius is extremely tired and he needs to go to sleep. He's been watching the liquid for 3 days and nights. He tells the narrator not to touch the liquid, and then he goes to sleep. Whilst he's sleeping, the narrator is thinking about his girlfriend who's gone off with another man, Albert, and he gets very angry with that. Then he remembers the potion. Cornelius has told him that it's a potion to cure love, and he wants to be cured of his love for Bertha. So the narrator, once he's seen it, takes a sip. Once he's sipped it, Cornelius wakes up and grabs him, says, "What are you doing? You shouldn't be touching this potion." The narrator makes out that he hasn't touched it and that he's just held it up and dropped it. And he does not tell Cornelius that he's taken any of it on this occasion. So you see here, now that you've read the extract, the 4 questions that you must answer based on what you've read. And if you look at question 1, it's from lines 7 to 9. So you should have ruled that off and put question 1 in the margin. Question 2 is from lines 1 to 10. So that overlaps a little bit, but again, you should have ruled it off and identified where you've got to look for the answer to question 2. The same can be said for question 3. This time it's based on lines 14 to 25. So you should have ruled that off and written a number 3 in the margin so that you just look at that bit and don't look at any of the others. Question 4 is slightly different in this particular extract because it asks you to make comments about the entire text. So let's look more closely at question 1. It asks you to identify from lines 7 to 9 a phrase which describes what happens to the colour of the liquid when it changes. And you can see from the text underneath this question that Cornelius indicates that the colour is going to change, turn white, and then emit golden flashes. And when the rose colour fades, he's got to wake, the narrator's got to wake Cornelius up. It's a tricky question because it's not asking you what colours everything goes to, it's asking you what happens. And what happens to the colour is that it fades. And you'll see in red the sentence answer. The colour of the liquid fades when it changes. If you answer like this, you've used a sentence, you've included a quotation directly from the text, and you've used the words from the question in your answer to show that you're focused on the right thing. Question 2 asks you to look at lines 1 to 10 and give 2 ways in which tiredness affected Cornelius. Now, if you think about that, if something affects you, then something changes with you. So this is what we've got to look at here. It's a little bit tricky because the language is old-fashioned. And again, you can see where I've highlighted in the red the 2 ways in which tiredness affected him. It weighted his eyelids. In other words, his eyes began to close. And it stole away his senses. So in other words, he couldn't feel anything, or his senses became numb because he was so tired. And the model answer expands upon that. His tiredness affected him because he kept closing his eyes. This is suggested in the word waited. And the second reason, because he was so tired, he was not so alert. His tiredness stole away his senses. And you've done the same thing as we did in question 1. You've picked out a quotation, you've written a sentence, and you have expressed your views in answering the question with the words of the question. In this slide, you'll see a model answer to question 3. Question 3 asks you to look specifically at lines 14 to 25 and asks you to explain how the writer uses language and structure to show the narrator's feelings about Bertha. Don't get overly concerned about the expression language and structure. You've literally just got to explain what happens here to show how his feelings are revealed. And we state that in our opening sentence. The narrator moves from regret to hate in these lines. So you have to make a sort of summary statement about the whole paragraph and then expand upon it. And if you look at the model answer, he begins by thinking regretfully about happier times with Bertha, statement, and then we use a quote to say where we've got that suggestion from. So we've said this is suggested by the words dwelt on 1,000 charming scenes, never to be renewed. So he's thinking about when they were happy and that this is never going to happen again because she's gone off with Albert. Notice punctuation here can be commented upon. So the narrator repeats the word never and uses an exclamation mark, which shows his strength of feeling. From regret, he begins to feel angry with her, calling her false girl, false and cruel, again with the exclamation mark. And false is the old-fashioned word for somebody who used to tell lies. So your explanation is, this implies she's told him lies through the word false. So he's moving from regret to anger and now hate. His feelings become even stronger as he feels hate for her. With the quotation, she had the power of exciting my hate. What he's doing here is making his feelings become stronger. So you move from regret to anger to hate. This slide looks at question 3 again, but I've color-coded it here so that you can see how you can combine statements, the green text, with comments and explanations, that's your blue text, and then quotations which justify or help justify your points. And if you do it this way, if you argue your case clearly, you will get credit. There's no right or wrong answer in how you must say it, and I think that should give you confidence in tackling question 3. Question 4 takes you back to looking at the whole text, and if you look at the question, it says there's an attempt to show how important it is to concentrate on a task. It's a little bit misleading because you might just think this is about the narrator who doesn't concentrate on watching the liquid, but it's also about Cornelius. He doesn't concentrate anymore because he's too tired. So just be careful that you can cover both of those things in this question in order to move you up in the marks. The question asks you how successfully something is done. If you remember from previous PowerPoints, we've said it's always easier to argue that it is successful rather than not. And if you look at the statement, which you should aim to start with, it says the extract successfully shows that concentration is important because things go wrong if you don't. This is shown through the philosopher and the narrator. So you've stated in your opening sentence who you're going to be looking at and what happens if you don't concentrate. And then, of course, you can look at the bullets for each of the characters. For Cornelius, he can't concentrate because he's so tired. Because he can't concentrate, he wrongly relies on his assistant, and the experiment goes wrong. When it has gone wrong because he didn't concentrate, he becomes angry and he's lost his life's work. Now, they're statements, and obviously they'd need backing up with quotations and comments. Same can be said for the narrator. He doesn't concentrate on the task because he's thinking about Bertha. And because he's thinking about Bertha, he's surprised and frightened when the liquid flashes and changes. And he's so set on being cured of the torture of his love for Bertha that he loses all concentration and doesn't follow the philosopher's command of not drinking the liquid. Again, you would need to back that up with quotations and comments. Comments, if you've got the words suggests, demonstrates, implies, or shows one of those, then it leads you into explaining your thoughts.